Hello everyone out there on the interwebs. My name is Forrest out in Phoenix, and I'm going to talk to you today about a dance called the Peabody. So before I get started, my wife, who is far more interweb savvy than I am, explained to me that to properly do this I needed to be sitting in my car and wearing a baseball cap. So now that I'm properly dressed in order to pontificate, here we go. So just some thoughts here real quick about the Peabody. Okay, my take on it as a dance historian, I get asked about Peabody probably more than any other dance actually, and definitely considered an expert on it. All right. First, I got some notes here. I'm going to go through and make sure I cover everything. One of the things I often wonder when people contact me about it is, why Peabody? Why does somebody want to learn the Peabody? And likely the term Peabody, as far as people going, oh, I want to learn the Peabody, it's because that's the only term that they know or have been exposed to. See, the Peabody actually was called the Peabody one-step. It was a variant of a dance called the one-step, which was by far the most popular dance socially in the US, basically from the ragtime era to World War II. Now, I say that because most people were not good dancers. To this day, most people are not good dancers. It is a very socially functional dance. The one-step meaning that I'm just taking a step to every beat. Now, that wasn't 2/4 time. So if you're dancing to 4/4 time, or jazz time, if you will, you're dancing every other beat, every 2 beats. So slow, 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 step, step, basically marching, okay? That makes it super easy and you can learn it pretty much instantly. Now, like all dances, there are levels, right? You can be very beginner with it, you can be dancing at intermediate or advanced or exhibition, competitive levels, what have you. That's always been the case, always will be the case. But the average Joe and Jane, well, they were probably just marching around. And you can see that in film. If you go back, especially look for, I'd say, New Year's celebrations. Those were often filmed. You can look and see what people were doing on the social dance floor through the years. And most people were just marching around. They didn't have polyrhythmic movement for the most part. It didn't matter if you were looking from the ragtime through the Dixieland era into the jazz era and the swing era. If you're just watching people out for the night dancing, that's what they're doing. All right, so enough of that about that, because a lot of times people focus on what they see in a film, and that's not reality, right? As far as a movie goes, or maybe you're a film that's being filmed at a dance hall, right? When they know the film crew's going to be there, all the dance hall junkies show up and they want to show out. So that's not really a slice of reality. Okay, from there, I want to say that by far, the one-step was more common than the Peabody. The Peabody was considered a variant. That's the way dance teachers thought back then, okay? Like the new steps for the season or whatever were things you incorporated into what you already knew. Now, the one-step was a variation of a dance called the turkey trot. Really was a gentrified version of it, cleaned up, to make it socially appropriate, because there was class warfare happening basically during the ragtime era. It's the first time the middle class basically was going out, had free time and money to blow. And so they were dancing in ways that the more socially elite viewed inappropriate, dancing super close, moving their hips and their bodies. And so that was considered, taboo. So they made a cleaned up version of it because, well, honestly, even the rich people wanted to learn how to do it. So that was a nice compromise for the dance teachers. They got to have their cake and eat it too. Now, after that, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the term one-step. One-step basically fell out of favor with the music switching to more complicated rhythmic structures in the mid-20s. Okay, until that point, you see the one-step in publication quite a bit. Okay, so it became a bit of a passé term in starting the mid-20s to the late 20s. And that's when you start to see, again, it being used less, and they start even calling it fast foxtrot at that point. Foxtrot meaning that in the perception of the dancers of the era, you'd see foxtrot being 4/4 time, instead of using a march tempo in 2/4, okay? And you can see that in records. If you look at the records, the record catalogs and such, you can see records were labeled foxtrot, waltz, tango, rumba, yada yada. So just go by year and see when they stopped printing one-step, and that's what you're going to find, okay? Now, if you go back and listen to the music, you're going to see that what was labeled one-steps evolved as, of course, music evolved and changed, was popular culture changed. So the dancing in and of itself most likely changed with it as well, as far as the characterization of it, right? But again, I'm talking about little changes over time, and the average person's just marching it out, okay? Now, the Peabody was always considered an advanced variant. It was not something that was for the average person. It was for people that were avid dancers, that were, out at the dances all the time, okay? Because it was polyrhythmic, yes? It wasn't always, it didn't need to be. You could do those steps not polyrhythmic. But when you go back and look, you're gonna find that it's polyrhythmic pretty much in any printed manual for the most part. Now, let's see. The dance one step, let's talk about that. As far as the one step goes, a lot of those things got absorbed into other dances. A great example that people might know would be Balboa. Balboa has a decent amount of one step in it. Say what people call paddle turns, which would be known as like pivot turns or quarter pivot turns back in the day. Those are still done in it, yes. Movement called the serpentine, that's straight up one step, okay. What people call the crab step, also known as grapevine steps, those are straight up taken from the one step, yes. So you're gonna see like pivot turns, right? As far as full pivot turns, spinning around each other, right? Well, you can see that basically an evolution from the turkey trot into Texas Tommy, into the one step, right, into the Peabody, yes. So tempo, let's talk about tempo real quick, okay. So tempo, if you go back and listen to ragtime era music and then listen to the music as it's progressing and changing through the years, you're gonna see some changes going on, okay. Now, it was always a walking dance because again, it's really uncomfortable to move slow with slows, and it's uncomfortable to move really quick. So of course, a comfortable pace is going to be the most common pace people are going to be moving at, right? This is a little bit common sense there. However, people, again, because of the diversity of it, its simplicity of it, they dance it to any tempo, yes? So it didn't matter, I'm just walking it out no matter what's on. So you see a variety. Now, mind you, in the dance manuals and such written by dance instructors, right, you're going to see instead foxtrot taught often. Right? Again, this would be later, right? As you start to see that. And then you're going to see that one step in Peabody really taught for fast foxtrot. And you'll see it labeled as such, right? They don't hide that. Okay, now, the Peabody term really wasn't a commonly used term. One step was known all over. Peabody really was a regional term, okay? Regional to the New York City area where it was invented and the surrounding communities, yes. And you don't really see the term popping up much until really the swing era, yes. Again, New York City, where Lindy Hop evolved from as well. So that's when you start to see that term, and it gains more traction. But still, really wasn't that common of a term. And part of that had to do with it, again, being more advanced, dancers dance, and not being as practical. Okay, so I talked to some dance instructors from back then, and it was interesting. They said they didn't really use it much. It really wasn't that practical for crowded dance floors. It required, you're covering a lot of ground. So instead they did the one step instead of trying to do Peabody, more advanced figures and such. Yes, and that's what they taught. They said that basically the people that were doing Peabody were the advanced dancers, and there weren't that many of them, and especially ones that were good at it. Very few. So, again, it's normal to think, like, how many great dancers are there in any dance community, right? Especially ones that know multiple styles at a high level. So a little common sense there, but a lot of times people tend to make very generic statements, right? Let's see, another thing I want to talk about. As far as the term Peabody and when it became popular in the national consciousness really had to do with the first National Dance Council, right? We call it the NDCA today. Well, before it was called the NDCA, it was called the National Council of Dance Teacher Organizations. It was founded in 1948. Okay, their first published syllabi was from 1963, and it included the Peabody. Okay, now all of the different dance organizations, like Arthur Murray and Fred Astaire, which you know today, Dance Educators of America, Dance Masters of America, all of those organizations all had agreed to the syllabi. And then you see the 1975 syllabi, which is their silver syllabi, right? Their more advanced steps came out. And at that time, that's when you start to see publications from, say, Arthur Murray's and Fred Astaire incorporate the Peabody, okay? Now, it didn't really catch on in the grand scheme. It did somewhat, but again, it was considered a higher level dance. So you had to already be somewhat proficient because they're teaching Peabody. They're not teaching one step at this point. It was to fill in the gaps of fast foxtrot at that time. And as such, most people that were learning this had to already be a decent dancer. So it was always considered a dancer's dance. And then after that point, you see it really fall off. Why? Because the population that was dancing that style and to that music, it was no longer popular. You've got to think, what music was popular then? Disco? Pop music in the 80s? So when I started dancing in 1990, there were still old timers out there dancing one step. I didn't know it at the time. I didn't understand. I just thought they were shuffling around there, kind of didn't know what they were doing. Now I realize that's what they were doing. Yeah. So it's perception, right? Now, the Peabody, even in the 1950s, right, when you still had, first generation dancers out, and you had the swing era dancers still out there with the hardcore ones, right? They said that flat out. I mean, Roseland was known for being like the home of the Peabody, and I asked people that were at Roseland how many people were there and how many people got on the floor to those fast songs doing Peabody, and they said a handful, less than a dozen always, and the ones that were really good at, maybe 5. So that's a healthy helping of a slice of reality of Peabody versus one step. One step it could be done condensed as well, right? So I guess the last thing is the contemporary drive for Peabody, I feel, is based more upon exhibition and competition, right? Because again, we're talking about a dancer's dance. All the time when people ask me about Peabody, I ask them if they know the one step. If you don't know the one step, why are you trying to learn an advanced version of it? You should start with the fundamentals. Learn that. Teach that to people instead of jumping right into something that requires more skill, in my opinion. Again, the people that are asking me a lot of times, they're professionals or avid dancers. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but do you have a background in foxtrot? Are you used to the close position, much less doing it at twice the speed? So that would be my question. There's nothing wrong in doing whatever you want. This is dance, it's art, have fun. But just some food for thought from a historian. I hope you're having a great day. Thanks for listening.